Day 690 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on 370,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 840 in the past day. Then in terms of their hardware losses, 10 tanks, 33 APVs, and 19 artilleries. Then we'll head across to the map and we'll start out in Russia today, in fact in St. Petersburg of Russia, as Russia's largest online retailer named Wildberries, think of it as an Amazon ripoff of Russia's, which may have had a smoking incident of its own, because its 750,000 square foot warehouse in the region was engulfed in flames. In fact, the fire was so big that there was really no trouble seeing this event from space. According to the preliminary data from Russia's Ministry of Emergency Situations, the cause of the fire was due to some faulty electrical wiring. And although I wouldn't want to speculate too harshly against the official Russian narrative, it was, however, also reported that just earlier in the day, there were Kremlin raids at the location, where masses of workers were detained to be sent to fight in Ukraine, with a particular focus on detaining the migrant workers. But not everything is being set ablaze at 500 degrees centigrade in Russia, because in another segment of the Russian Big Freeze, there's been blackouts in Rostov-on-Don, with many areas cut off from electricity. No water, no heating has also been reported as well. And the same situation can be said for the neighboring city just on the south of Bataysk. And since I'm here, I'll just also mention that Rostov was also having unmaintained infrastructure of a different kind quite recently, as it was noticed that a vehicle was falling under the asphalt a couple of days ago. Then moving across halfway to Moscow at the Oblast of Voronezh, as more burst water mains caused more hot spring-like environments for the region. And now, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov made comments on the country's current infrastructure issues, seeming to state that these issues will take years to fix, but that state funds will not be allocated to the assistance of such issues. But even then, more and more reports are coming out now about scheduled blackouts in various locations, such as the Rostov Oblast we've just been to, and more information coming out or coming to light about the need for Moscow itself to perform these daily scheduled blackouts, which continues to put on display the fragility of their electrical or power infrastructure. Then moving briefly to Krasnodar in Russia, where more defective missiles were noted in the fields of the region after an unsuccessful air launch into Ukraine from Russian airspace. Then, close enough by in the semi-autonomous Chechen Republic region of Russia, the headquarters of the 70th Guards Motorized Rifle Regiment, which is taking part in the war in Ukraine, burned down, with an eyewitness appearing quite delighted. And apparently, on the order of Putin, inspections of military units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation were scheduled to begin. Then we'll head into the Ukrainian map today and we'll move across to the northeastern segment of Kharkiv, right next to the Donbass, as there was a very sobering assessment of the situation by the Russian forces in the Sinkivka direction, as a Russian telegrammer stated the failure of a recent Russian push into the grey zone, with the telegrammer stating that the loss ratio of Russian soldiers is 1-7, so in Ukraine's favor, which is actually a figure that's been generally accepted for quite some time now, 7-1, 8-1, that sort of thing. and specifically for this region as well. So it's experiencing something of a cold snap right now, with temperatures struggling to rise above freezing over the next week, leading to lower ground temperatures. As a result, the conditions for cross-country movement will almost certainly improve throughout January and February before the Rasputitsa thaw in March. And with that being the case, I would much expect a larger and more concerted effort from the Russian forces to take ground right here in the north, but it is likely to look something a lot like Avdiivka, where I'm guessing a minimal loss of ground for Ukraine with a maximal attritional meat grinder achieved, as we've really seen so much of before at this point. Then, speaking of meat grinders, we'll move all the way down to Avdiivka today. So, still into the Donbass really here, as there has been a bit of back and forth in the northern flank near Stepova, with most notably a battle between a Russian T-90 tank and a US-supplied Ukrainian Bradley M2 infantry fighting vehicle, where we saw the Bradley shoot at the T-90 almost point blank, and the tank did not survive. It also appeared with some footage that the tank wasn't really lining up its turret towards the Bradley M2 at all, just sort of spinning it around in any direction, as it appeared that the Russian crew were untrained and panicking, which, needless to say, this shouldn't happen. Also, the Bradley M2 only used its 25mm cannon, and not its anti-tank tow missile in this ordeal. So here we have a Bradley destroying the most modern Russian tank, which is huge, as this was actually the latest T-90M variant of the Russian tank as well. Then moving around and somewhere in the east and behind Russian lines, as here we have a Russian soldier who reviews his pickup truck that got totaled by a Ukrainian kamikaze drone. Bam, right through the car bonnet, right there. Then I'll move down a bit south, as the Russian appointed senator of the Russian captured area of Zaporizhia has been illuminating the situation about the armed forces of Ukraine having a surplus of drones in this sector. So he went on to mention that there are drone operator departments in almost every AFU infantry platoon, and he confirmed this from his own experience, stating that every time he goes to a frontline village, that it feels like you've entered a hornet's nest, because everything is buzzing. And he also confirmed what we've come to really know in this conflict, that the FPV drone operators work in pairs, so one attacks and the other records the defeat. And so he goes on to end off his doom posting, stating that Russia needs to technologically advance, just as Ukraine has. Then we'll head across to some news for today. So Russia seeks to fill its private sector personnel shortages in the workforce by getting migrants from Africa to fill the void. Now in this instance, it's been established through Kenya that Russia will receive 10,000 workers to fill that almost 5 million worker shortage that the country of Russia has. And call me cynical, but this is likely not what Russia will be doing with these inbounds. Because although Russia does have some severe work shortages, there is one thing more important than anything else to Putin, which is not to lose the war. And given the countless stories now of Russian authorities detaining immigrants, then one way or another forcibly mobilizing them into the war zone, this new set of circumstances is just not going to be different. No different at all whatsoever. Then across to some other news. So Russian filmmakers are already in Mariupol making propaganda films about the war. And what you see here is some behind the scenes footage of what I expect to be some righteous, heroic Russian story of someone saving Mariupol from Ukraine, followed by Russia feeding this junk to their own population. Never mind the fact that Russia pretty much destroyed the Ukrainian city in the process. But hey, the Kremlin needs something to maintain morale in the society, or try to bring it back. Then moving across, because I've got a couple of news segments that really do seem to fit into the funny section, so here we go. So starting off with the first one. So Captain Spin Doctor is at it again, as Putin was recently explaining the reason for the massive and unexpected increase for the cost of eggs in Russia. And his excuse? Basically that everybody's gotten wealthier with increased wages in Russia, which has led to increased egg consumption. And therefore, Russia didn't think to open imports in time. Which is probably a very hard pill to swallow for the Russians that are watching that little doozy of a speech at home, asking themselves where all of their newfound wealth is. But in truth, the reason for this is because of sanctions and inflation, which has significantly affected the purchasing power of Russians and their Russian ruble. Then to another funny to round it all off for today, guys. So, advanced Russian headgear has made its way to the Russian Storm Z assault units for superior night vision capabilities. And this is for a headlamp that has some real fitting problems, it seems. And so one of these Russian soldiers reviewing it on video, much like others that have received goods that have been supplied by the Russian army, where we find this guy as being equally as critical of this latest flimsy upgrade. Plus, it looks like Russian military supply contractors are buying an off-the-shelf product, so to speak, from Chinese e-commerce website AliExpress. Which is not what you want to do when you're attempting to project military power. Because this is not fit for purpose, obviously, as you can see there, and you're only going to get what you pay for. So Russia just continues to show off its systemically flawed and corrupt system with little hope for change. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. I do, as always, continue to really appreciate your likes and the comments and your support there as well. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!